Hey, it's Amber Collins. I'm 28 now, and 3 months ago, everything I knew about my family life came crashing down in our Boston home. It started the night my dad chose someone else over me. And no, I'm not being dramatic. I wish I was. It was raining hard outside, the kind of downpour that makes the windows rattle. I remember lying in bed staring at the ceiling when I heard her voice, my stepmother Heather, cutting through the sound of the storm like a knife. She said, "Either she leaves this house and your life, or I do." And then silence. When Dad didn't defend me, when he didn't even hesitate, I knew it was over. I got up, packed my bags, and walked out. What neither of them realized was that I'd seen this coming, and I'd been quietly preparing for it. Heather thought she won that night, but the thing about hollow victories, they often mark the beginning of a deeper downfall. Before we jump into what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had to walk away from someone you love, for your own sanity, hit that like button and subscribe. This one's for all of us who know what it's like to be forced to choose peace over proximity. Let's rewind a bit. My relationship with my dad, Thomas Collins, used to be unbreakable. He's a celebrated architect here in Boston, responsible for designing some of the city's most iconic buildings. But even with his intense work schedule, he never missed a Sunday pancake breakfast, never skipped a sailing trip in the summers, and always showed up for me. When I graduated with my finance degree from Boston University, the way he looked at me from the crowd, I've never forgotten it. It was pride, pure and bright. And then there was my mom, Rebecca. She was everything. A pediatrician, loved by every patient who ever sat in her office, and the steady, grounded energy to my dad's whirlwind creative drive. They were the couple you looked at and thought, that's it, that's the dream. I never once questioned whether they loved each other. They were madly in love after 25 years. But life, as it often does, doesn't always honor fairy tales. Mom got sick. Aggressive pancreatic cancer. One minute we were planning holiday trips, the next we were holding her hand through chemo. 6 months later, she was gone. I was 25, working in New York at a financial firm, but I came home every weekend. I watched Dad wither. He stopped drawing, barely ate, sat in the garden she loved so much, not saying a word. He was gone in his own way. The grief counselor told us that everyone heals differently. That's what I told myself when just 8 months later, Dad started seeing someone new. Her name was Heather. Heather was the firm's new office manager, 15 years younger than Dad, early 40s, flawlessly put together blonde hair that never moved, and a gym body sculpted like a Renaissance statue. I met her for the first time at the office Christmas party. Dad introduced her as a friend, but the way his hand lingered on the small of her back told another story entirely. She smiled at me like a politician and said, "Your father talks about you all the time. He's so proud of your work in finance." I've always found numbers so intimidating. I gave her a polite nod, but inside something didn't sit right. Still, for Dad's sake, I played along. Their relationship moved faster than a hurricane. Within 3 months, she'd all but moved into our home. By the 5th month, they were talking engagement, and 6 months after they met, he called me, voice trembling, with a mix of excitement and guilt, to tell me they were getting married. I didn't even know what to say. "Amber, I know it's fast," he said, "but Heather makes me happy again. I didn't think that was possible after your mother." The wedding was small, rushed, nothing like the big, joyful ceremony my parents had shared. I stood by Dad's side as his best woman, watching him marry someone I barely knew and didn't trust. Heather wore a dress that probably cost more than Mom's car, and my Aunt Julia, Mom's sister, squeezed my hand during the vows. "Your mother would want him to be happy," she whispered. But the look in her eyes, she didn't believe it either. After that, I made a quiet decision. My lease in New York was up. My company had just announced a remote work policy. I told Dad I was coming home to spend time together and help him through the transition. Truthfully, I came back to keep an eye on Heather. And it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Heather started by rearranging the kitchen. The old setup's inefficient, she said. Mom designed that kitchen. Next, she started hinting about converting my childhood bedroom into a home gym. Since you're only here temporarily, she said at dinner. Dad didn't say anything, just looked down at his plate. It became a pattern. Heather would push. Dad would resist at first, but eventually cave. It was like watching her erase my mother piece by piece. I kept my distance working from a converted sunroom during the day. But the tension in the house was thick. My college best friends, Ryan and Jessica, who still lived in Boston, became my safe space. She's just claiming her territory, Jessica said one night over wine. Maybe it's normal new wife behavior. Ryan was less subtle. I don't trust anyone with that many filtered selfies. And I checked her Insta before she went private 3 rich boyfriends in 5 years, all older. I wanted to believe it was just awkward blending, that Heather was trying too hard, but every time she accidentally threw out my almond milk or forgot to do the laundry, I knew it was more than that. Then I overheard them arguing. Heather was furious over remodeling plans. Dad insisted on checking with me first, since the money came from a joint account with Mom. It's our house now, Heather snapped. Why does she need to be involved? Dad said softly, Amber has a right. That was her mother's money too. And then she said it. So I'll always be living in Rebecca's house. Is that it? That was the moment I realized Heather didn't just want a future. She wanted to erase the past. And I wasn't going to let that happen. By the time summer rolled around, Heather's mission to take over the house went into overdrive. One morning, I came back from my usual run, and something felt off. That instinct kicked in. You know, the one where your skin tingles because something in your space has shifted. Sure enough, Mom's antique grandfather clock and heirloom that had been in the Collins family for generations was gone from the entryway. Heather, I asked, trying to stay calm, where's the clock? She looked up from her tablet so casually it made my stomach turn. Oh, that old thing. It didn't really match our aesthetic anymore. Don't worry, it's in storage. I looked at Dad. He was suddenly engrossed in his coffee, unable to meet my eyes. Later that night, I found the clock listed for sale on an antiques website. When I confronted her, she smiled that plastic smile and said it was just to assess its value for insurance. That's all. The listing disappeared the next day. But by then, I had already started taking screenshots. I was documenting everything. Mom's photos vanished from the walls, replaced with enormous portraits of Heather and Dad from the wedding. The garden Mom had nurtured for 2 decades, ripped out. Replaced with sterile gravel landscaping and LED-lit planters. Less maintenance, Heather claimed. One night over dinner, as Dad quietly choked down a quinoa salad, Heather was calling a reset for our digestion. She brought it up again. Once Amber moves back to New York, I thought we'd redecorate her room. Something modern and clean. A proper guest room. I set my fork down. I haven't decided if I'm moving back. Heather gave that tight smile she'd perfected. Well, this arrangement isn't exactly long-term. You're almost 30, Amber. Don't you want your own life? Before I could speak, Dad finally intervened. Amber's welcome here as long as she wants. Heather's smile didn't falter, but her eyes tightened. Of course she is. I just worry about her career. Remote work is convenient, but everyone knows real advancement happens face-to-face. Her passive-aggressive remarks became routine. My almond milk started expiring suspiciously early. Clothes I left in the dryer, magically relocated wet and wrinkled in a basket by the stairs. Always just enough to make me question if it was on purpose. But it wasn't just the petty stuff. Something far worse was brewing. I overheard another argument one evening, this time about money. Dad, always meticulous with finances, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Heather's spending. I don't understand why we need to consult Amber about the master bathroom remodel, she said sharply. This is our house, our decision. Dad replied, drained and tired. That money comes from the joint account your mother and I built. Amber deserves a say. Heather shot back. So I'll always be a guest in Rebecca's house. That's it. Their voices fell and I backed away. but the knot in my stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. One day I noticed credit card statements in the recycling bin, statements Dad never usually printed. I took a closer look. $30,000 in charges, designer handbags, spa treatments, expensive salons, cash withdrawals, all within the last 3 months. My training kicked in. I'm a financial analyst. I deal with numbers all day, and everything about this screamed danger. I tried talking to Dad gently. Are you okay with all these new expenses? He stiffened. Your mother's been gone 4 years. I deserve to be happy. I want you to be happy, Dad, I said carefully. But it feels like things are moving really fast. And Heather, he cut me off. Change is part of life, Amber. She's my wife now. You need to accept that. These conversations always ended the same, with him defending her and shutting me out. I could feel him slipping away day by day. And then came the moment I couldn't forgive. I'd gone back to New York for a weekend office meetings. Nothing major. When I returned, Heather had moved all my belongings into the smaller guest room. My childhood bedroom transformed into her personal meditation space. Floor-length mirrors, mood-lighting yoga mats, a mini speaker system. It looked like a boutique studio. We didn't think you'd mind, she said, with syrup in her voice. This room has better light, for my plants. But the breaking point, it was dinner 2 nights later. Heather walked into the dining room wearing Mom's sapphire earrings. My chest tightened. Those were Mom's, I said quietly. Oh, Thomas said I could borrow them, she replied, reaching up to gently touch one. For the charity gala, they just match my dress perfectly. Dad nodded barely. It's just borrowing, Amber. Your mom would want her things to be worn and loved. I couldn't breathe. That night, I heard her in the hallway whispering on the phone. No, it's taking longer than I thought, she said. The daughter's still here, watching everything like a hawk. But he's coming around. Just a few more months, and we can move forward with everything. When she saw me, she froze, then smiled sweetly. Just confirming delivery times for our wedding photos. Photographers are such flakes. That night, I called Ryan and Jessica. Emergency meeting. We met at our favorite diner. The second I walked in, I said, she's up to something, and I think it's serious. Jessica, ever the calm one, leaned forward. Have you thought about hiring a private investigator? Ryan nodded. My cousin's stepmom did something like this, bled the family dry, then disappeared. Their concern mirrored my own. Heather wasn't just being pushy, she was planning something. So I did what I do best. I started digging. Using the same tools we use at the firm for background checks, I ran Heather's name, her history. Turns out Heather Mitchell had changed her name twice. Born Heather Wilson. Then Heather Daniels through her first marriage. Then Heather Mitchell after her divorce. Alone, not suspicious. But her financial history, 3 bankruptcies in 15 years, a foreclosure, credit cards maxed out. Each financial collapse followed by a new wealthy partner. There was a clear pattern. One by one, I began reaching out to those connected to her past. Richard Daniels, her ex-husband, was a high-profile real estate developer in Chicago. His son Michael responded to my message within a day. When we video called, he didn't waste time. So she found another one, he said flatly. My dad was 62 when she married him. Within 2 years, she had him rewriting his will, pulling from his retirement to fund her projects. She convinced him to cut off family who raised concerns. By the time he realized what was happening, she'd drained over $600,000. He paused. He died 6 months after the divorce. They called it heart failure. But I think it was heartbreak. He sent me documents, court filings, financial statements. The same pattern I was watching unfold with my father. That's when I knew I wasn't just dealing with a toxic stepmom. I was dealing with a serial predator, and she'd chosen my dad as her next target. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my new cramped guest room, the one Heather had so generously assigned to me, and pored over every single page Michael had sent. It was all there. The pattern, the charm, the manipulation, the money trail. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being paranoid. I was right. Heather Mitchell, Wilson, Daniels. Whatever name she was wearing, was a professional. She latched onto vulnerable men, isolated them from their families, drained their finances, and then vanished when the foundation finally cracked beneath her.
And my dad, he was in the middle of the storm.
I needed to protect him, but to do that, I needed proof. Not just whispers and speculation, hard evidence. So I got to work. The next morning, while Heather was out at one of her wellness retreats, I installed a discreet security camera in my room, one of those tiny, motion-detecting ones with cloud backup. I'd noticed drawers were getting moved around when I wasn't home. My files were out of order. Even my locked drawer looked tampered with. Within days, I had footage, clear as day. Heather rummaging through my things, taking photos of bank statements, trying different combinations on the small safe I kept tucked in my closet. It was surreal, like watching a heist movie, except it was in my own house, with the woman who had married my father playing the lead role. I started documenting everything, every suspicious action, every missing item, every time she mentioned finances or dropped innocent questions about my dad's accounts. At the same time, I began researching Massachusetts tenant laws. I needed to make sure Heather couldn't legally kick me out, especially since I was still receiving mail at the house and had lived there most of my life. I had rights. Stephanie, one of my closest friends from college, and now an attorney specializing in elder financial abuse, became my sounding board. I showed her the footage, the documents, everything. If she tries anything, Stephanie warned me over coffee, you'll need solid paper trails. Start documenting everything. Emails, texts, financial moves, all of it. So I did. I moved important items to a safety deposit box at the bank. Mom's letters, financial records, even photos I didn't trust Heather to leave untouched. I opened a new bank account at a separate institution, moving my savings there quietly. And I kept my voice down, kept the peace, let Heather think she'd won, because I knew that if I played my cards wrong, she'd slam every door shut before I could act. I also pulled copies of Mom and Dad's original will and trust documents. They'd been prepared by a lawyer named Mr. Greenberg, one of those old school guys who still kept everything in hard copy. Luckily, he remembered me and agreed to meet discreetly. Turns out the estate had some very specific language: irrevocable trusts, protected assets, financial instructions in the event of remarriage. Heather may have had access, but not control. Not entirely. Then came a call that raised every alarm I had left. It was from Martin Dad's longtime business partner and co-founder of the firm. Amber, he said, not even trying to hide his concern. Your father's talking about retiring early, selling his shares, walking away from everything. My heart sank. Did he say why? Something about travel plans. Heather's idea. 6 months in Europe. But Amber, the terms he's discussing. He's undervaluing everything. He's talking about liquidating his stake in a project he's spent a decade developing. The Henderson Tower. That was Dad's baby, his legacy. He wouldn't walk away from that unless he was being pushed. I thanked Martin, added his information to my growing file, and decided to bring it up subtly at dinner. So I said, twirling pasta around my fork, "Are you still working on Henderson?" Dad paused, barely looking up. "Actually, I'm stepping back. Heather and I have been talking. Maybe it's time for a change of pace." Heather chimed in her hand, finding its way to his arm. "He's worked so hard for so long. We want to travel, explore, live a little." I nodded like I didn't want to flip the table. I knew what she was doing. Isolate him from his career. Cut off colleagues like Martin. Liquidate assets. Disappear. This was the same playbook she'd used on Richard Daniels. Only this time she'd underestimated me. That night, I put the final touches on my contingency plan. I found 3 affordable apartments, 2 in Boston, 1 in New York, and kept the listings saved. I packed a go-bag, important documents, flash drives, photos, cash, and essentials. I wasn't going to be blindsided. Then I waited. The tipping point came during what looked like a normal dinner. Heather, of course, was trying a new recipe, a bland imitation of Mom's famous lasagna. Dad barely touched it, but didn't say a word. Heather started rambling about Thanksgiving. We're doing a silver and white theme this year, she said. Minimalist, no clutter. The traditional look is so outdated. I blinked. What about Mom's decorations? The ones in the attic? Heather waved her hand. Oh, those I donated them to Goodwill last week. They were just collecting dust. I put my fork down. You what? They were old amber, she said, sipping her wine. It's time for a fresh start. I looked at Dad. Did you know those were Mom's? The ones we painted together? He sighed. We can't keep everything. That wasn't your call, I said quietly. Heather set down her wine glass a little too forcefully. This is our home now. We make the decisions. It's been our family's home for 28 years. You've been here 10 months. Heather's mask slipped. Her voice sharpened. You follow me around this house. You spy on us. You monitor his spending like you're his handler. I'm concerned, I said, still calm, because things are changing fast. Heirlooms are missing. His firm, his life's work, is being thrown away. You mean your inheritance, Heather snapped. That's what this is really about, right? Dad stood clearly overwhelmed. Enough, both of you. Then she delivered the line I'd been expecting. Thomas, either she leaves this house and your life, or I do. I can't take this anymore. Silence. Dad looked at me, not angry, not firm, just tired. Amber, he said softly, maybe it's time you went back to New York. You have your career, your life. I stared at him, breath caught in my throat. You're choosing her. He looked away. Maybe we all need some space. Heather, of course, smiled sweetly. We'll help with your security deposit. And that was it. I went to my room, packed what mattered, left a note for Dad. I love you too much to watch this happen. When you're ready to talk without Heather around, call me. At 11:30 p.m., I slipped out of the house, loaded my car, and drove to Jessica's place. She met me at the curb with a blanket, a cup of tea, and a look that said everything. I didn't cry until I saw my old house in the rearview mirror, its windows glowing in the dark, like the eyes of something that used to be safe. But this wasn't the end. Not even close. This was just the reset. Heather thought she'd won, but she had no idea what I had already set in motion. Jessica's guest room became my war room. I had everything I needed to execute a plan. And let me tell you, in the beginning, it was hard. Processing the betrayal, trying to keep calm while staying strategic, that took every ounce of emotional discipline I had. But I had one advantage. I knew Heather's game now. And unlike my father, I wasn't under her spell. Dad texted every day at first, short, awkward messages. Hope you're settling in okay. Let us know if you need help getting your things. We should grab dinner sometime, just the two of us. Not once did he acknowledge the real reason I left. Not once did he apologize for choosing her ultimatum over his own daughter. I kept my replies short, cordial, but distant. I knew Heather would be watching our texts. I couldn't let her know what I was doing behind the scenes. And believe me, I was doing a lot. Step one was meeting again with Stephanie, my lawyer friend. Her specialty in elder financial abuse turned out to be more relevant than either of us ever imagined. She reviewed my evidence and said, while your dad isn't technically elderly, the patterns here: emotional isolation, sudden financial shifts, manipulation, they're textbook abuse signs. So what can we actually do? I asked. Stephanie nodded. We can't stop him from making his own choices, but we can put protective measures in place. Do you have access to any of his legal documents from when your mom was alive? I did, and they turned out to be the key. Dad and Mom had created irrevocable trusts and estate protections years ago. Smart financial planning, thank God. Heather might have access to some funds, but she couldn't rewrite history. Stephanie and I moved quickly. We recovered old documents from Dad and Mom's attorney, Mr. Greenberg, and started building a legal case. But beyond that, I needed to gather more voices. I had to show this wasn't just an Amber problem, it was a pattern of behavior. So I went back to Michael Daniels. Then I found another ex, an investment banker from Seattle. Then another, a surgeon from Miami. Different lives, different cities, same Heather. Whirlwind romance. Quick marriage. Social isolation. Unusual financial withdrawals. Disaster. Each man had a daughter or son who tried to intervene just like me. And in every story, Heather used the same tactics: make the parent feel young again, needed, adored. Then once they were vulnerable, she'd drain their finances and vanish. She's gotten smarter, said Alan, the banker. She makes fewer mistakes now. She's slower, more methodical. She's grooming your dad, said Dr. Evan, the surgeon. Same thing she did to me. I only got out because my daughter caught her transferring funds. You need to act fast. With their permission, I recorded video statements. I compiled a massive file: testimonies, timelines, divorce settlements, financial transactions, background reports. Meanwhile, my life had become a quiet fortress. I found a modest but secure apartment leased under an LLC I created just for this purpose, so Heather couldn't trace it. I moved my remaining belongings with Ryan's help and made sure my name didn't show up on any digital directories. I kept my job, worked remotely, and told my boss, who'd been incredibly supportive, that I was going through family issues. He understood and granted me full flexibility. Jessica and Ryan were my emotional anchors. Jessica helped me stay grounded and calm, while Ryan, who worked in cybersecurity, helped secure every aspect of my digital life. We set up account monitors, encrypted folders, and privacy protections Heather would never be able to crack. You're not just surviving, Ryan said one night, raising a glass of wine. You're going full James Bond. It's not over, I replied. Not until Dad sees the truth. That part was the most delicate. Every 2 weeks, I met Dad for lunch, always in public, always casual. No mention of Heather unless he brought her up. No accusations, no tears. Instead, I focused on memories: Mom, our family, his old projects. It was like tending a dying fire, flickers of warmth in between the cold silence he carried with him. One afternoon, he told me Heather's found this incredible villa in Tuscany. We're thinking of spending October there. Italy in the fall, I said calmly. You should visit Montepulciano, that vineyard Mom loved so much. Remember the one where she said the sunsets looked like oil paintings? Dad paused. Something flickered in his expression. He hadn't thought of that place in years. Small things like that, tiny cracks in the walls Heather had built around him, those were my openings. Meanwhile, the evidence file grew bigger. Financial reports from a forensic accountant revealed Heather had opened 3 new credit cards under her name and racked up over $45,000 in charges. Spa visits, designer handbags, private fitness classes. The bigger shock came from Ryan, who traced her digital footprint to a real estate agent in the Cayman Islands. Heather had been asking questions about permanent residency and banking regulations, not for vacation, for disappearing. Even worse, countries like the Caymans don't always comply with U.S. extradition requests. She was planning a full exit, and soon. I updated the file. I worked with Stephanie to prepare a legal strategy that would freeze all remaining joint assets, prevent further withdrawals, and trigger an automatic fraud investigation if she attempted to sell anything major, like the house or the firm's shares. Dad was slipping toward the edge, and Heather, she was about to shove him over. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. A rainy Tuesday night. I'd just gotten back from a meeting with Stephanie when my phone rang. It was Dad. His voice was hollow, unsteady. Amber, he said, almost whispering, I think I've made a terrible mistake. I sat straight up. Can we meet somewhere private? I didn't hesitate. Murphy's Diner, I said. 30 minutes. It was our old Sunday spot. I hadn't eaten there since before Mom died. When I got there, the place was almost empty. I chose a corner booth where no one could overhear us. I could barely sit still. When Dad walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked 10 years older than he had a month ago. His hands trembled as he wrapped them around the coffee mug the waitress had instinctively brought him. What happened? I asked quietly. I was reviewing some paperwork for Italy, he said. Visa stuff, bank documents, and there were discrepancies, big ones. He pulled out his phone and showed me. Withdrawal after withdrawal, over $200,000 in 2 months. She said they were for deposits, he muttered. Travel arrangements. Consultants. Did you check the safe, I asked. His face crumpled. Your mother's necklace is gone, he whispered. And her sapphire ring. Heather said she took them to the jeweler for cleaning, but when I called, they had no record. I reached across the table and took his hand. What else, Dad? She left her phone out while she was running. Text messages. With someone named Marcus. About Cayman accounts. About timing. About finishing what they started. He stopped. I feel like a fool, Amber. I trusted her. You're not a fool, I said. You're a man who was grieving. And she saw that. Then he looked at me, eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Not confusion. Not guilt. Clarity. You've known, haven't you? I nodded. I have something to show you. I pulled out a flash drive and my laptop. For the next hour, I walked him through everything. The name changes, the bankruptcies, the ex-husbands, the financial trail, the evidence from other victims, the surveillance footage, the emails, the credit card charges, the offshore plans. He didn't interrupt. He just watched silent and heartbroken. When I was done, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and whispered, I let her into our lives. I pushed you away. You didn't push me away, I said. You gave me a reason to fight harder. He opened his eyes. What do we do now? That question, what do we do now, had been at the heart of my plan for weeks. I pulled out the second folder I had prepared. This one neatly labeled and divided with color-coded tabs, financial freezes, legal strategy trust protections, and a contingency script for confronting Heather. This wasn't a case of wait and see anymore. This was action time. Step 1, I told Dad we cut off her access. We started immediately. From the booth at Murphy's Diner, Dad logged into his banking apps and began changing passwords. We contacted the bank to place holds on joint accounts. Stephanie had already prepared emergency legal documents, so I pulled out the power of attorney form and Dad signed it on the spot. It gave me the authority to act quickly if Heather retaliated. That same night, we drove to a storage facility where Dad had quietly moved some of Mom's things items he suspected Heather might try to sell. We cataloged and photographed every heirloom, every piece of jewelry, every family document. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Dad was a man transformed. Shaken, yes, but focused. She has no idea, he said, staring at the signed documents. She thinks I'm meeting the travel agent today. I told her I'd handle the banking side. She's expecting another $50,000 wire this afternoon. She's going to notice soon, I said. Once she realizes she can't access those accounts, she'll panic. And that's when she'll get dangerous. Stephanie met us at her office that morning. Together, we finalized the legal side, formal asset protection notices, documentation for courts, and the divorce petition already prepared and ready to serve. She's going to try to gaslight her way out of this, Stephanie warned. Don't let her emotions distract you. The goal here is to stop the bleeding and take back control. She's good at emotional manipulation, Dad said quietly. She used my worst fear, being alone, as a weapon. Not anymore, I said. By the afternoon, Dad had moved into a corporate apartment near his office. It was temporary, but safe. His laptop-safe documents and a small case with Mom's remaining jewelry were secured in a fireproof lockbox. Heather didn't even know he'd left the house yet. That evening, Heather's texts started coming in. Heather, the Chase account is giving me weird errors. Heather, can you call the travel consultant? They're saying payment failed. Heather Thomas, what is going on? Dad didn't respond. Not yet. The next day, we arranged for the confrontation to happen in Stephanie's office, neutral territory, with legal protection. We didn't want Heather creating a scene at the house or manipulating Dad emotionally in private. Heather showed up dressed like she was going to a brunch with royalty white blazer, oversized sunglasses, flawless curls. She walked into the conference room and stopped cold when she saw me, Stephanie, and a paralegal waiting beside Dad. What's going on? She asked, her smile fixed, but her voice tight. Please sit down, Mrs. Collins, Stephanie said firmly. We have some serious matters to discuss. Heather tried to play innocent at first. She feigned confusion about the banking errors, said there must have been a mistake with the travel agency, claimed the property in the Caymans was a surprise anniversary plan. But then Stephanie opened the evidence binder and laid out a very different story. Timeline, bank statements, surveillance photos, text messages, real estate inquiries in foreign jurisdictions, testimonies from Richard Daniels' son and 2 other ex-partners, bankruptcy records, evidence of item listings on online marketplaces that matched things missing from our home. Heather's smile cracked like ice under pressure. She shifted to defense. This is insane. You're being manipulated. Thomas, she's always hated me. She wants your money, not me. You can stop, Dad said quietly. I see it now. Heather's tone darkened. You think a judge is going to believe this witch hunt? I've been your wife. I've supported you. We made plans. No, he interrupted. You made plans. I was just the mark. Stephanie calmly slid a folder across the table. This is your copy of the divorce petition, effective immediately. There's also a temporary court order freezing further access to joint marital assets. Heather's face changed entirely, cold, calculating. You'll regret this. That's the first honest thing you've said, Dad replied. She stood, tossed her purse strap over her shoulder. You think you've won, but this isn't over. She left the room with her heels clacking like gunshots across the marble floor. That was the last time I saw her in person. Over the following weeks, everything unfolded like a storm finally breaking after months of tension. The divorce proceedings were swift. Heather's threats to fight for alimony and shared assets were weakened by the mountains of evidence we presented, and the testimonies from her previous victims helped convince the court she had a pattern of fraud and predatory behavior. The DA's office even opened a formal investigation into multi-state financial exploitation, using our file as a starting point. Of course, some damage couldn't be undone. Dad's liquid savings were significantly diminished. But the house, thanks to the original estate trust, remained protected. The architectural firm, which had been days away from a bad sale, was salvaged after Martin stepped in and helped untangle Heather's influence from Dad's retirement paperwork.
And the most important thing,
Dad began to come back to himself. He stayed with me for a few months while the legal dust settled. Our roles reversed. I cooked. I organized his files. I made him laugh when I could. He started therapy to work through the emotional trauma, not just from Heather, but from the unresolved grief he still carried from losing Mom. We went back to the house together one day in early spring. It was quiet, still, as if the place had been waiting for us. We unpacked old photo albums, rehung the wedding picture of Mom and Dad that Heather had tried to throw out. We planted fresh hydrangeas where Heather had installed stone paths. It didn't fix everything, but it was healing. One Saturday, Dad made pancakes just like old times. We sat at the breakfast table, syrup pooling around slightly burnt edges, and he said something I'll never forget. To the daughter who saved me from myself, and to Rebecca, who raised a warrior. I raised my coffee mug to second chances, the real kind. And in that moment, for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed it. 6 months later, the dust had finally begun to settle. Dad had moved back into our family home, not the version Heather tried to mold into her Pinterest fantasy, but the real home we remembered. We spent weekends restoring it room by room. We brought back Mom's touches, the little antique clock that had somehow resurfaced at a local consignment store, the mismatched ceramic mugs she collected from farmers' markets, the paintings she loved, but Heather had boxed up. The garden bloomed again with her favorite perennials, lavender daisies, and pale blue delphiniums. Every time Dad knelt in the dirt beside me, digging and planting and remembering, I could see more of his old self reemerge. Therapy helped too. He began to talk openly about Mom's death for the first time in years, about the guilt he'd carried, the loneliness that had made him vulnerable, and how deeply Heather had sunk her claws into his fear of growing old alone. It's not just about falling for someone like her, he admitted one night. It's about what I was afraid to face without her. You weren't weak, I said. you were human and grieving. He nodded. But I won't be that blind again. Around the same time, something unexpected started happening. Families of Heather's previous victims began reaching out, either through Stephanie's network or because they'd heard about our case. Some just wanted to share their stories. Others wanted to know how we stopped her. One was the daughter of a retired judge from Phoenix, who Heather had nearly married 2 years earlier. Another was the son of a tech investor from Seattle, who had disappeared from public life after a financial scandal. The more stories we heard, the clearer it became. Heather wasn't just a manipulator. She was a pattern, a system. And she needed to be stopped, not just for us, but for anyone she might target next. So I worked with Stephanie Michael Daniels and a few of the others to form a small advocacy group. We called it Guardianship, now focused on awareness, prevention, and resources for families dealing with financial predators in personal relationships. We launched webinars, wrote articles, and collaborated with elder protection organizations. To our surprise, the district attorney's office even invited us to speak at a financial crime summit. What started as my personal nightmare was quickly turning into a mission. And that's when the final chapter of Heather's saga arrived. 18 months after we confronted her, I got an email from the Arizona District Attorney's Office. Heather had been arrested. Again. This time she had targeted a retired surgeon in Scottsdale using the exact same tactics: whirlwind romance, quick marriage proposal, financial advice, and attempts to shift control of property. But something different happened this time. The surgeon's daughter had recognized the signs from one of our articles. She stepped in early, exposed Heather before she could cash in. I stared at the email, the words glowing on my laptop screen. Your work made the difference. I forwarded it to Dad immediately. When I walked into the living room, he was sitting in Mom's old reading chair, the dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird in his lap. She's done, I said. Someone caught her early this time, and they knew because of us. He smiled slow and sad. Good. She won't do this to anyone else. That night, we sat in the garden together, wrapped in blankets, sipping tea, watching the stars blink alive above the treetops Mom planted with love. Do you ever wonder how we didn't see it sooner? I asked. All the time, Dad admitted, but I also know we can't go back, only forward. And now, I asked, leaning back in the chair. I'm not broken, he said, not anymore. Over the next few months, life started to feel, dare I say, normal again. Dad reconnected with Martin and the rest of his firm. Though he didn't want to return full-time, he agreed to consult on a few architectural projects that excited him. The spark returned to his eyes every time he pulled out his sketchpad. And then one Sunday morning, he said something that caught me off guard. I'm meeting someone for coffee this week. I blinked, like a date. He chuckled nervously. I don't know. Maybe. Catherine, she's on the hospital foundation board. We've crossed paths over the years. Just coffee. I smiled. Mom would approve. I think she would, he said quietly. But this time, I'll go slow. As for me, that experience had reshaped everything. I stayed in Boston and accepted a promotion at my firm director of compliance and fraud detection. That made me laugh a little. I turned personal chaos into professional growth. Jessica and Ryan were still my ride-or-die support. We celebrated the anniversary of Operation Backup Activated with cupcakes and sparkling cider. You should write a book, Jessica said. Call it How to Spot a Sociopath in Designer Shoes. Ryan chimed in. Or How to Save Your Dad Without Losing Your Mind. I laughed, but part of me knew that this story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to anyone who's ever tried to pull someone they love out of a toxic fog. Anyone who's ever had to make the hard choice to step away knowing the truth wouldn't be seen right away, but hoping, praying that one day it would. And it was. Eventually. One evening, Dad came home holding a small wooden box. I found this in storage, he said, placing it on the kitchen table. It was Mom's jewelry box, the one Heather had taken, then claimed she was just borrowing. Inside were her sapphire earrings, her wedding ring, and a letter she had written but never given me. A note tucked under the velvet lining. My hands shook as I opened it. Amber, I know one day you'll be the one who holds us together when I can't. You've always seen things others miss. Never doubt that instinct. It's your greatest strength. I read those words again and again, the tears coming this time, not from pain, but from healing. She knew. She always knew. Life has a funny way of giving us answers long after we stop asking the questions. Reading Mom's letter felt like the final piece clicking into place. It didn't erase the past. It didn't make Heather's actions any less vile or my father's vulnerability any less painful. But it gave me peace. It reminded me why I fought in the first place, not just to protect my father's finances or our home, but to protect the love and legacy that Mom had spent her whole life building. I kept that letter in a frame on my desk. Every time I glanced at it, it was like she was still whispering in my ear, "Trust your instincts. Keep going." Months passed, and the house began to feel alive again. Not perfect. There were still echoes of what happened, but the warmth had returned. The laughter, the shared meals, even small things like the smell of cinnamon in the kitchen on Sunday mornings or hearing Dad hum Sinatra while doing dishes became signs of healing. One day he said something that stuck with me. I used to think strength meant holding it all together. Now I know sometimes it means letting someone else step in when you can't. That's what family is. Not always clean or easy, but real. Built on trust, not just love. Dad eventually finalized everything with the courts. Heather never showed up to the final divorce hearing. Her legal team folded the second we presented the fraud timeline, and she walked away with nothing but what she came in with, which wasn't much, unless you count manipulation and a mountain of debt. The DA in Arizona took it from there. The last I heard, she was awaiting trial. Sometimes I wonder if she sits in those cold holding cells, wondering how she finally got caught. If she realizes she pushed one daughter too far, one woman who had the skills, the resources, and most importantly, the love and resolve to take her down. But mostly, I don't think about her at all anymore. These days, my focus is forward. My job in fraud detection has blossomed into something I'm passionate about. I now specialize in identifying patterns of financial abuse, whether it's in families, relationships, or even internal corporate structures. It's fulfilling in a way I never expected. The advocacy group we started, Guardianship Now, has grown beyond what we imagined. We've helped dozens of families recognize red flags before it's too late. We've even partnered with financial institutions to develop training programs for identifying manipulation in elder accounts. That email from the district attorney still sits at the top of my inbox, pinned like a digital badge of honor. Your work made a difference. It reminds me that this was bigger than us. Dad and I still have dinner every Sunday. We rotate between my place and the old house. Sometimes we cook, sometimes we order takeout, but the tradition holds. It grounds us. And yes, he did go on that coffee date with Catherine. Then another, and another. He told me last week, "It's nice to have someone to talk to again. Someone who sees me, not what they can get from me." I smiled. "You deserve that." "I know that now," he said without hesitation. And maybe that's the most powerful thing to come out of all of this. Not just that we survived it, but that we grew stronger because of it. People always talk about battles, about how to win, how to fight back, how to confront the enemy head on. But what I learned is that sometimes the most powerful response to manipulation isn't aggression. It's strategy. It's patience. It's knowing when to step away, not in defeat, but in calculation, watching, documenting, waiting.
And when the moment comes,
Striking with everything you've got. So if you're watching this and something about my story hits home, trust your gut. If someone you love is acting out of character, becoming isolated, or making financial decisions that don't add up, don't ignore it. Ask questions. Document everything. Don't let fear or politeness keep you quiet. And if you've ever had to make that painful choice to walk away from someone you love, to protect them or yourself, you are not alone. Sometimes, space is the only way truth can rise to the surface. Mom always used to say, love isn't just about holding on. Sometimes it's knowing when to let go just long enough for someone to find their way back. That's what this was. Not a war, not a revenge story, a rescue. And in the end, it wasn't just about saving my father. It was about saving what he thought he had lost forever: family, truth, and the unwavering bond between a daughter and the man who taught her to be brave, even when he forgot how to be. If you found strength in this story, please give it a like. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not crazy for asking questions. Subscribe if you want more stories about fighting back with facts and love instead of fury. And if you're in the middle of your own storm, remember this. Sometimes the most powerful kind of strength doesn't roar. It waits. And when the time is right, it wins. Thank you for watching. I'm Amber Collins, and this was my story.